I never thought I would be telling this story. Not like this. Not in my voice. For years, I lived in a world where silence was survival. Where asking questions meant betrayal. My name, the name given to me at birth, was Asma bint Zayed al-Khalid. To most, I was simply Princess Asma. Born behind palace walls in Riyadh, daughter of Sheikh Zayed al-Khalid, a man both feared and revered. My mother, Amira, never spoke much. She wasn't allowed to. Like every woman in my family, her role was simple: obey, submit, and keep her face hidden behind the veil. From the outside, my life looked perfect. Gold floors, marble walls, handmaids attending to me every morning. My breakfast was served in silver trays, my wardrobe endless. I could have anything I asked for, except answers. That was the price of being born royalty in a world ruled by old laws and older fears. They told me I was blessed. They said I had the life every girl dreamed of. And maybe I did. But every night, I lay awake feeling like a prisoner in silk chains. I remember the first time I questioned anything. I was 13, standing outside the palace mosque, barefoot, after morning prayers. I watched a stray cat limp past the marble gate, and I asked my tutor why Allah created animals that suffer. He slapped me. Not hard enough to bruise my skin, but hard enough to bruise my mind. He said, "Princess Asma, you are forbidden from questioning the will of Allah. Questions are the weapon of the cursed." After that day, I kept my thoughts locked away. Hidden, like the rest of me. But thoughts have a way of growing in the dark. And as I grew, so did my hunger to understand why my life felt wrong. Why prayers didn't heal my emptiness. Why fear controlled everything around me. By 17, I could recite the Quran better than most scholars. I had memorized every verse, every hadith, every law that governed my existence. But none of it brought peace. Only confusion. Only silence. Until the day I found the book that wasn't supposed to exist. It happened in the most ordinary of moments. I was in my father's private library, a place I often escaped to, since no one questioned the habits of the obedient daughter. Between dusty manuscripts and political texts, I found a small, leather-bound book without a title. It wasn't Arabic. The letters were strange, but familiar. My heart raced. I hid it beneath my abaya and fled. In my chambers, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and sat on the marble floor. I turned the pages. It was written in English. The language my father said was the tongue of infidels. But I had learned it in secret, taught by an old servant who pitied me. That night, I read words that burned into my soul. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I didn't know whose words they were. I didn't even know it was from the Bible. All I knew was that for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Something stirred inside me. Something gentle. Something dangerous. I read the book every night after that. In secret. My heart pounded each time I heard footsteps near my door. In those pages, I learned about a man called Jesus. A man my imams had warned me about. But he didn't sound like the cursed prophet they described. He spoke of love. Forgiveness. Freedom. The more I read, the more my world cracked. My father's world was built on fear. His God demanded submission. But the God in that hidden book, he spoke of grace. That terrified me. Because it meant everything I had believed was a lie. Or worse, that my life had been built on a truth I could no longer accept. Then came the night I couldn't hide my secret anymore. I was caught. And everything changed. I will tell you how it happened. But not yet. You need to understand that before I lost my title, before I lost my family, before I lost my name, I was still Asma, the princess who thought her silence could protect her. But silence cannot protect you from the truth. And the truth was coming for me, whether I was ready or not. My name now is Mary. And this is my story. I didn't start out wanting to leave Islam. I wasn't searching for a way out. At first, all I wanted were answers. But in the world I was raised in, questions were more dangerous than sins. I remember being 16, sitting in the palace courtyard, watching the other women from behind my black niqab. They moved like shadows, quiet, obedient, invisible. I saw my mother's face once in the mirror as she adjusted her veil lined with sadness, tired from years of pretending. I asked her that morning, "Mother, are you happy?" She looked at me, paused, then whispered, "We are not supposed to think about such things." That answer stayed with me far longer than it should have. I had everything, at least that's what they said. I had jewels, designer clothes I never wore outside, servants who bowed lower than necessary, and guards who treated me like a prisoner more than a princess. I was taught that Allah had chosen this life for me, that to obey my father was to obey Allah himself. But every time I watched the palace gates close behind me, I wondered why freedom was forbidden to someone like me. I remember sitting in the palace library, hidden behind the tall curtains, watching dust float in the sunlight. That's where I found small questions creeping into my mind. Why are women worth half a man in court? Why must I cover my face when my brothers walk freely? Why does Allah punish curiosity? And yet, I told myself these were not my thoughts. They couldn't be. I feared them like I feared hell. At night, I tried to pray for them away. My father's voice echoed in my memory, "The greatest shame for a daughter is to question her faith." So I buried the questions deeper. But the more I buried them, the heavier they grew. I loved my father. In my world, love was not warm affection but loyal obedience. He believed he was protecting me, keeping me pure, keeping me safe from the corruptions of the outside world. But I wanted more. Not more clothes. Not more gold. More of something I couldn't explain. I wanted peace. I wanted to know who I really was under the black fabric and scripted prayers. One night, after a long day of Quranic lessons, I stood in front of the mirror, still veiled, and asked myself out loud, "Who am I, if not my father's daughter?" The silence in that moment chilled me more than the desert winds ever could. I didn't want to dishonor my family. Every day, I lived between two fears, the fear of losing them, and the fear of losing myself. I remembered my younger sister, Layla, always quick to obey, her heart never troubled like mine. Why wasn't I like her? Why was I born with a mind that couldn't stop asking? Each prayer I prayed felt heavier than the last. I knelt, forehead pressed to the prayer mat, begging Allah to remove my doubts. But he was silent. And that silence broke me more than any punishment could. My restlessness became unbearable. I started avoiding gatherings with the other royal women. I spent more time alone. The walls of the palace weren't protecting me anymore. They were suffocating me. And the more I longed to speak, the more trapped I became in my silence. I thought about escaping, not from the palace, but from the questions. I told myself it would be easier to stop thinking. But no matter how hard I tried, the questions followed me. Like shadows. Like whispers. One morning, as I watched my mother silently arrange dates on a silver platter for the family, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to become her. I didn't want to live a life where silence was survival. But to avoid her fate, I had to risk everything. My home, my father's love, even my life. And that's when I understood the truth. My hunger for answers was no longer a choice. It was a fire burning inside me. A fire I could no longer control. At 17, behind the palace walls, under the veil, I was still a princess. But inside, I was already a prisoner of my own questions. Questions that would soon lead me to a truth I wasn't ready for. But it was coming. Whether I wanted it or not. I didn't go looking for secrets. Not at first. I thought perhaps I could silence my doubts with obedience, or at least with ignorance. But there's a strange thing that happens when you pretend not to see something that's right in front of you. Your heart refuses to forget it's there. It started the day I found a forbidden book. Not the Bible. That would come later. This was something different. My father's library was off-limits to women, but as his daughter, no one dared stop me when I wandered its halls. That day, curiosity led me to a section lined with books in languages I barely recognized. There, tucked behind a row of legal documents, was a small book written in Arabic but written differently, old, formal, difficult to read. I thought it might be poetry, but it wasn't. At first, the pages felt harmless. Then they didn't. I read about punishments I had never been told in our lessons. Words that chilled me, death for the one who leaves Islam. I read it over and over, thinking it must be wrong. Maybe I was misunderstanding. But page after page confirmed it. Stories of men and women, centuries ago, who were executed not for killing, not for theft, not for crimes, but simply for walking away from the faith they were born into. My stomach turned as I kept reading. It wasn't just ancient history. These were laws. Still practiced. Still defended. In mosques, in courts. Even my own father, a man I loved, upheld these very rules as divine commands. Suddenly, the silence around me wasn't protection. It was controlled. Fear disguised as obedience. I thought about the people I had seen punished in our city square. Floggings. Public shaming. And now I wondered, had they merely asked the wrong questions? Chosen to believe differently? How many of them died for wanting the same answers I sought? I remember sitting alone that night in my bedroom, holding that old book like it was burning my hands. For the first time, I realized my life wasn't mine. I wasn't safe. Not from outsiders. But from my own people. My own family. If they knew what I was thinking, if they saw the questions in my heart, I wouldn't be a princess anymore. I would be an enemy. I tried to convince myself it wasn't true. I thought maybe my father didn't really believe in these punishments. Maybe they were just old traditions no one practiced anymore. But then, a week later, I overheard my uncle speaking with him. They were discussing a distant cousin. A young man who had converted to something else, I never heard what exactly. My uncle's words echoed in my ears, he should be put to death quietly. No need for scandal. And my father said nothing. He simply nodded. That night, I wept into my pillow until my body shook. I wasn't weeping for that cousin I barely knew. I was weeping for myself. For the girl who was now trapped. I understood what the walls around our palace truly meant. They weren't there to protect me from the world. They were there to keep me from finding it. In those days, my heart changed. I stopped trusting the teachings I had memorized all my life. Not because I wanted to rebel. Not because I hated my family. But because fear should never be the reason we believe something. And now, I knew that fear was the reason behind everything in my world. I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. I tried to read the Quran, but every verse reminded me of the law that demanded my silence, or my death. I felt like I was standing on a cracked floor, and every step threatened to pull me deeper into an emptiness I couldn't escape. I started watching everyone differently. My mother, who smiled but never laughed. My younger sister, Layla, who obeyed because she didn't know she had a choice. My father, who believed he was righteous, yet could end the life of his own daughter if I dared speak my thoughts aloud. This was the deadly secret I had uncovered. Love meant nothing in a world ruled by fear. And faith meant nothing if you couldn't leave it without dying. My heart couldn't bear the weight of that truth. I wanted to run. But there was nowhere to go. Not yet. So I did the only thing I could. I kept silent. And waited. I didn't know how close I was to breaking. Days blurred together inside the palace walls. I stopped speaking much, even to Layla. I felt as though my soul had been locked in a dark room, and every day, the air inside grew thinner. There were moments I wondered if I was losing my mind. I prayed the prayers they had taught me, repeated the verses I had known since childhood, but they sounded like the voice of someone I no longer recognized. Then, one night, it happened. I remember every detail, as if the memory was carved into me. I had fallen asleep after hours of silent weeping. The room was cold, unusually so, though the desert outside was warm as always. I woke up, or thought I did. But when I opened my eyes, the room didn't look like my own. Everything around me glowed softly, like moonlight, but without a source. I wasn't afraid. I should have been, but I wasn't. I felt, still. As if time itself had stopped just for me. Then I saw him. A man. Dressed in simple white robes, standing at the far end of the room, though there were no walls anymore, just endless light behind him. His face wasn't harsh like the imams had said. He wasn't angry. His eyes, dark and deep, met mine, and in that single glance, I felt every fear I had carried fall to the ground. I couldn't explain it, not then. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Not of my father. Not of punishment. Not even death. He didn't speak with his lips. But I heard him. Clear as my own heartbeat. He said only a few words, yet they changed me more than all the years of teachings I had endured. He said, "I am the way. You are not forgotten." I tried to respond, but my lips wouldn't move. Tears poured from my eyes without my permission. My body felt too weak to stand, yet my soul felt stronger than it had ever been. He took a step toward me, and with every step, the light grew warmer, brighter. I should have been blinded, but instead, it was as though I was seeing for the first time. I understood, somehow, that he was calling me. Not forcing me. Not demanding. Just calling. Inviting. His presence wasn't heavy like the God I had learned about. It wasn't angry. It was gentle. Strong, yes. Unshakable. But not cruel. Then he said something I couldn't forget. "You were made for freedom." The moment he said those words, I fell to my knees. Not out of fear. Not out of command. But because my heart couldn't carry the weight of love I felt pressing into me. Love that didn't demand my silence. Love that didn't punish my questions. And just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. The light faded. The cold air returned. I woke up, gasping. My cheeks were wet from real tears. My body was trembling. But my heart was alive in a way I didn't know was possible. For hours, I sat in silence, replaying the vision over and over. I questioned myself. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it wasn't real. But every time I said those words, something inside whispered back, "But you know it was." What disturbed me most was how this vision didn't align with what I had been taught about Jesus. I was told he was just a prophet. Lesser than Muhammad. Nothing special. A man forgotten by history. But in that vision, he wasn't forgotten. And he certainly wasn't lesser. He stood like the center of everything, yet reached out to me, someone who should have been invisible to him. And the more I remembered his words, the more I understood what he meant. I had been trapped not just by palace walls, but by fear. Fear of men. Fear of punishment. Fear of questioning. Fear of losing love. But his words, "You were made for freedom," shattered those chains. I wasn't created to obey in silence. I was created for something more. I wanted to see him again. I wanted to know more. Who was this man in white? Why did he call me when I wasn't even looking for him? Why did his voice make me feel loved, when all I had ever known was fear? That night changed me. I didn't realize it then, but the vision had planted something in me that no punishment, no threat, could ever uproot. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. But as I sat beside my mother, watching her silently prepare breakfast like every morning before, I whispered in my heart words I never thought I'd say. "I want to know you." Whoever he was, whatever he wanted from me, I knew one thing. I had to find him. Even if it cost me everything. I don't know how long I stayed trapped between fear and hope after the vision. Days turned into weeks. Every morning, I woke up wondering if it had all been a dream. But every night, when I lay in silence, I could still hear his voice. "You were made for freedom." Those words wouldn't let me go. And so, quietly, carefully, I began to plan something I never thought possible. Escape. Even thinking of it felt like betrayal. I wasn't just risking my life, I was risking my soul, according to everything I'd been taught. If caught, there wouldn't be mercy. My own father would see it done. Death, or something worse. Honor killings weren't just whispered stories where I came from. They were reality. For a princess to abandon her family's name would stain their honor forever. The shame would be worse than losing me. I knew that. Still, something inside me kept whispering, "Go." But how? I watched it constantly. Guards at every door. Walls higher than any ladder. My father's palace was a fortress. I had no friends outside. No allies. No money of my own. I was just a girl with questions and a vision, trapped inside a golden prison. Until one morning, a single door cracked open. Her name was Sarah, one of the servants assigned to clean my chambers. She was older than me, with soft eyes and tired hands. She had always been kind, but distant, as all servants were taught to be. That day, though, she noticed me staring out the window, silent for too long. I don't know why I spoke. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the hidden hope that anyone, could help me. I said softly, "Have you ever heard of the man in white?" Her hands froze. Her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Fear, yes, but something deeper. Recognition. She didn't answer. Not then. But 3 days later, she slipped me a piece of paper folded inside a linen cloth. It contained only a name, Father Yusuf, and a location I barely recognized. An old church building hidden in the poorer district of Riyadh, where most of the royal family never ventured. At the bottom, just 3 words, "He will help." I kept that paper hidden inside my pillow for days, terrified even to touch it. But I knew now, I wasn't completely alone. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, someone could help me. Someone who knew the man I saw in my dream. The next weeks were torture. Every step I took felt like it echoed too loudly. Every glance from the guards felt like suspicion. But in the silence of my heart, I was preparing. Watching. Planning. The palace gates opened once a week for deliveries. It was the only moment anyone from the outside came close. I knew if I missed that window, I might never get another chance. But how could I get past the guards? How could I leave without raising an alarm? The plan was dangerous. Foolish, maybe. But it was all I had. On the morning of my escape, I wrapped myself in a servant's cloak. Stolen the night before, hidden beneath my bed. I tucked my hair under the scarf, lowered my head, and prayed not the prayers of my childhood, but a desperate plea to the man in white: "If you are real, lead me." I joined the line of workers carrying supplies from the courtyard. My heart raced so loudly I thought it would betray me. The guards glanced at my lowered face but saw nothing unusual. I passed through the first gate. Then the second. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt numb, but I forced them forward. When I crossed the outer gate, I felt something inside me shatter. I was no longer Princess Asma. I wasn't anyone's daughter. I wasn't anyone's possession. For the first time, I was just a girl running for her life. I didn't look back. Sarah had told me how to reach Father Yusuf's church. It wasn't a real church anymore, just a crumbling house used as a meeting place for those who believed as he did. I walked for hours, through streets I had only seen from car windows as a child. The city smelled different outside the palace walls, dust and sweat and freedom. I was terrified. But with every step, his words echoed louder than my fear: "You were made for freedom." When I finally knocked on the wooden door of that old house, I didn't know what to expect. Maybe nothing. Maybe death. But when the door opened, and Father Yusuf's kind, weathered face looked into mine, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Hope. Without a word, he stepped aside and let me in. And just like that, the princess disappeared. Mary was born. The first days after my escape felt like stepping onto a new planet. The small, crumbling house where Father Yusuf took me smelled of old wood and burnt coffee. There were no marble floors, no servants bowing at my feet. Just silence and safety. For the first time in my life, no one watched my every move. No one expected anything from me except honesty. And even that felt strange. At night, I lay on a thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake. I missed my mother's quiet presence, my sister's laughter, even the sound of my father's footsteps echoing in the palace halls. I missed home, though I knew I could never return. But over those sleepless nights, one thing kept me from running back: I no longer belonged to that world. I had traded my prison for freedom. And I couldn't forget the man in white who had called me into it. Father Yusuf taught me gently. He never pushed, never forced. He simply opened a book and let me read for myself. The words felt familiar yet new, stories of Jesus Isa, as I had known him, but not as a prophet who came and went. As a savior. A man who loved without conditions. A man who called the broken and the lost. For the first time, religion wasn't fear. It was hope. After weeks of hiding and learning in that old house, Father Yusuf asked me if I wanted to be baptized. I didn't understand everything. I still carried questions, doubts, and pain. But I knew one thing with certainty: I wanted to follow the one who had found me. The one who had stood in my dream and told me I was not forgotten. The baptism happened quietly. No grand ceremony. Just a hidden courtyard at dawn, behind Father Yusuf's house. A small basin of water. And my trembling heart. I wore a plain white robe, borrowed from an old woman who prayed over me like I was her own daughter. As Father Yusuf lowered me into the water, I felt fear try to rise one last time. What if I was wrong? What if death waited for me after all? But when he spoke the words over me, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and I felt the water cover my face, something inside me broke open. When I rose from that water, it wasn't fear I felt. It was peace. Not the fragile peace I had chased in silent prayers as a child. This peace felt like a hand steadying me from within. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't a prisoner. I was his. But the new life wasn't easy. I struggled to adjust. I had never cooked my own food. I didn't know how to speak to strangers without the barrier of royalty. I didn't understand the casual freedom of people who laughed in public, who prayed without fear of punishment. Everything felt strange. I missed my mother's perfume. I missed the sound of my sister's voice. I missed the comfort of the routine I had hated for so long. Yet every morning, when I opened my eyes, I remembered why I had left it all behind. I remembered the vision. I remembered the love that didn't demand my silence. And that love gave me strength. Slowly, my heart began to heal. The empty spaces inside me weren't filled with gold or control anymore. They were filled with scripture, with whispered prayers to the Jesus who had called me. I wasn't perfect. Some nights, I cried until sleep took me. But now, my tears weren't hopeless. They were cleansing. I was no longer Princess Asma, a girl hidden behind veils and palace gates. I was Mary, a daughter, a follower, a child of grace. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. It was only a matter of time before my past found me. For weeks after my baptism, I lived quietly, moving between safe houses that Father Yusuf arranged. But news travels fast in the shadows. One morning, long before sunrise, I heard his voice calling me from the small hallway. His face looked different that day. He wasn't just tired, he was afraid. My father knew. Somehow, he knew. I don't know who betrayed me. Maybe it was a servant who recognized my face in the streets. Maybe it was Sarah, though my heart still prays it wasn't. Maybe my absence had simply raised too many questions. But none of that mattered now. My father had sent men to search. The message was clear: if they found me, I was to be returned to the palace or killed quietly to protect the family's honor. It's strange how betrayal feels when it comes from people you love. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. I felt something deeper than both: sadness. I had loved them so purely. I had obeyed so completely. And yet, to them, I was now worse than dead. My mother, who had kissed my forehead each night. My sister, who had braided my hair with trembling hands. My father, whose approval I had once lived for. They now saw me as a disgrace, a curse upon the family name. I received the letter a week later. Hand-delivered to one of the safe houses. No signature, but I knew my father's words when I read them. He didn't ask where I was. He simply said, "You were my daughter. You are no longer. Return, confess, and perhaps mercy will be shown. If not, your blood is in your own hands." I held that letter for hours. I read it until the ink blurred from my tears. He had disowned me without hesitation. To him, I was already dead. But even then, something inside me refused to break. I remembered the man in white. I remembered his words, "You are not forgotten." I wasn't forgotten. Not by him. And somehow, that gave me strength. Enough to stay hidden. Enough to keep going. The threats didn't stop. Weeks turned into months. I heard rumors that my father had offered rewards for information about me, that distant relatives were now involved in the search. Honor killing, they called it. To me, it was simply death wrapped in the name of righteousness. Former Muslims who convert to Christianity are seen as traitors, not just to their faith, but to their entire bloodline. In my world, to choose Jesus was to choose your own execution. But I had already died. Not physically. But everything I had once been, Princess Asma, obedient daughter, silent prisoner, was already gone. What remained was someone new. Someone willing to suffer, if it meant staying free. I lived each day not knowing if it would be my last. And yet, even in the fear, I found peace. The world outside wanted me silenced. But inside, I was no longer silent. My heart belonged to Christ. And no sword, no father's wrath, no death threat could take that from me. I would not go back. I could not. Even if it cost me everything. If I could speak to the women I left behind, those hidden behind palace gates, those silenced behind veils, those who whisper their questions into the darkness, I would tell them this: you are not wrong for wondering. You are not sinful for questioning. You are not cursed for longing to be free. I was like you once. I believed silence was safe. I thought obedience would earn me love. But silence is not peace, and fear is not love. You were created for more than rules that chain your soul. You were made for freedom. Not the freedom of rebellion, but the freedom of truth. And truth is not something you should fear. Truth will not destroy you. Lies will. I do not hate my family. I do not hate my people. I pray for them every night, even as I know they might wish for my death. But I cannot return to a life built on fear. Because I have found a love stronger than any chain, a grace deeper than any shame, and a Savior who calls me by name. His name is Jesus. And he is real. He did not call me from the palace to punish me. He called me to rescue me. His voice was gentle when every other voice shouted condemnation. His arms were open when every other door closed against me. I gave up a kingdom to follow him, but in him, I found a kingdom that can never be taken from me. So to every woman who feels trapped, who feels forgotten, who thinks there is no way out, I am proof that there is. You do not have to live afraid. You do not have to die without knowing freedom. Seek the truth. Even if it costs you everything, it is worth the price. Because in the end, freedom is not found in escaping walls. Freedom is found in meeting the one who can set your soul free. I am no longer Princess Asma. My name is Mary. And I belong to Jesus Christ. From royalty to rejection, from Islam to Christ. I chose truth over tradition, love over fear. I walked away from gold, from power, from the life they said every girl should dream of. But in leaving all that behind, I found something far more precious. I found peace. I found freedom. I found Jesus. My story is not just mine. It belongs to every person trapped behind walls they're too afraid to question. Every woman who wonders if she was made for more than silence. Every soul is searching for a love that doesn't demand their suffering. To you, I say, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to seek. Truth does not fear your questions. And when you find it, you'll understand why I never looked back. I was once called Princess Asma. Today, I am simply Mary. And I am free. Thank you for watching my story. If it touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more life-changing stories like mine. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your journey, your questions, or your prayer requests. You are not alone. For more powerful testimonies and resources to help you discover the truth and freedom found in Christ, check the links in the description below. God bless you.